Hey, to all the managers and leaders out there, your role is like being a maestro, conducting a collection of different people, challenges, and triumphs. It's not always easy, we know that, to keep everyone in harmony, but when it works, it's pure symphony. So join us by the virtual water cooler as we share learnings and strike the right chord for success together.
Well, hi.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good, Rose. Not that anyone can see, but you have a certain glow about you. Why would that be? What have you been up to?
I have the Rosemary Beach glow. I've been getting the Rosemary Beach glow for 26 years.
No pun intended, right? Explain that.
No pun intended. It's a place that we've gone to as a family on the panhandle of Florida for literally 26 years. And I just got back on Saturday. So I'm sporting a bit of a tan.
Yeah, a little sparkle.
A little sparkle, a little glow. How about you, sister? I think you were traipsing around Europe.
I was, and it was fantastic. We were in Turkey and we were in Hungary. And travel like that, I didn't think about one thing back home. Not one thing, not one work, nothing. It just cleans the slate. Do you know what I mean? Like, I came back so refreshed.
Well, and you were in Budapest, I believe, and I'm going to be there this summer. So when we are done recording, I'm going to hold you verbal hostage for a bit and pick your brain about all the fabulous things to do in Budapest. So
yeah, I will, because it was a very cool city. It was a very cool city.
Well, and you know what else I was doing while I was at the beach? I was falling in love with two Instagrammers. I know that's random. And can I tell you why? Because they are pure joy. At a time where you may be stressed out with work or environment or whatever, they're just pure joy. One's called, and I want to promote them because they do nothing but bring happiness. One is called Simon Sits, and it's this lovely woman, Isabel Klee, who fosters dogs that have some type of health condition or, you know, the one trauma. The one that she's hosting now is named Tiki and has gone viral. So I'd suggest that one. And then the other dude is a guy that found out he had a serious back illness and he cashed out his 401k and he bought a boat and it's called Sailing with Phoenix. And he grabbed his cat and he redid this boat and he's sailing from Oregon to Hawaii and he's almost there. So like if our listeners want to listen or watch something that is just not stressful and pure joy, I would highly recommend Simon Sits and Sailing with Phoenix. And Dana, I think we have someone else joining us today that is also capable of just eliciting pure joy wherever he shows up. And so why don't we get started with the pod?
Yeah. All right. So we have Brad Haczynski. And Brad, give us, in brief, give us a summary of sort of your background and your current role.
And please, you don't have to say that you're like my brother from another mother, unless you want to drop that in the middle. You can say that.
Yeah. So my name is Brad Haczynski. I am currently the Chief Commercial Officer of Cornelis Networks. We are a startup that is really working on next generation high-speed fabric interconnects for HPC and AI workloads. And as you know, AI is all the talk of the industry right now.
Yeah, that was the only word I understood of what you just said, AI.
It's a complicated topic, and trying to break it down into layman's terms, especially when I'm talking to my family, is always a fun thing. But, my background is I spent 21 years at Intel. Rose and I worked very closely together. She was a mentor and a sponsor and a peer for many years, a degree in computer engineering. And then I knew I wasn't an engineer, so I decided to go into what they had, a program called the Sales and Marketing Rotation Program, which basically turns you into a technical seller through a variety of experiences. I had an amazing run at Intel. I got to do expats in France, in Canada, and Taiwan. I moved 9 times in 16 years. And before I left Intel, I led the Network and Edge global sales and marketing team. And Rose was running the data center and AI global sales and marketing team. So got the honor to work with Rose on the sales and marketing group staff. Then I moved to Samsung. So I left Intel in July of 2023. And for almost the last 2 years, I'd been at Samsung leading their mobile business for B2B. So, Samsung, believe it or not, is quite a substantial product portfolio. When you think of mobile, it's phones, it's tablets, it's PCs, it's watches and wearables and all kinds of software and services like Knox, and very differentiated capabilities where they can create a lot of value for customers and enterprises. So you're selling into all types of businesses, from small, medium business to large enterprise. And then I got a phone call and said, hey, do you want to get outside of your comfort zone? Mister, you've done two big companies, the two most iconic and largest semiconductors in the world at very senior levels, which is great. But what it takes to drive in a startup culture is quite a bit of different stuff.
So interested to hear about the contrast.
It's a different environment, but what it does, and maybe to set the tone for this conversation, is, you have to be humble. You have to be confident in what you know and what your experiences bring to you. But, I faced this when I went from Intel to Samsung, but now it's sort of a different order of operations, or it's a different element where you go, okay, just because I've been successful in a big company leading a large organization and large teams with a huge machine behind me, meaning finance and operations, et cetera, and product, right? Now, can I translate to a small startup environment where a lot of the things that you typically take for granted in a big environment aren't there?
And people really struggle with that. I mean, leaders who are, like you said, are used to sort of the big machine with the structure and the engine behind you, they can really struggle with that transition. So very interested to sort of hear your take. And our way into this is talking about a particular leadership approach that's often named servant leadership. And you've already led into it a bit with your discussion around you have to be confident and humble at the same time. And really, servant leadership's about you're here to serve the team, not boss the team. Although once in a while you might have to, but in general, the focus is just how do I enable their success? And there's a lot involved in that: empathy, listening. You got to build teams and community and so on. So, Rose, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the thing that's fascinating is what I really despise are leadership buzzwords, right? And the reason that I thought it would be fabulous to have Brad on the pod is because he used to be very front-footed about his servant leadership approach.
What does that mean, front-footed?
Well, front-footed, meaning he was vocal about it. He talked about it being his leadership style. He would inspire others by sharing that approach and the servant leadership with the teams around him. And I just remember him talking about it, and as he was prepping for an interview, as he was leading his team, it became part of his leadership fiber. But then when we were getting ready for the pod, I'm like, you know what I really hate is buzzwords. So I wonder if there's any research that shows the results and the impact of servant leadership. So jumped on our favorite new tool, ChatGPT. And I got a bunch of really fascinating data, like
with real sources.
Gallup and Greenleaf study that showed that it correlated with higher employee engagement and job satisfaction. And a 2014 Hunter study in the Journal of Applied Psychology that showed it improved psychological health and org commitment. And then, at the end of the day, you really want results. And in 2008, Leiden did a piece in Leadership Quarterly that talked about it positively associating with team performance and organizational behavior. So there was a lot of impact behind the approach, which was obvious to me because I saw how well Brad did with the approach at Intel, but it just kind of reinforced with data the servant leadership style of driving and leading organizations. So now the question to Brad, they're great words, they're great outcomes, but what did you do to personally practice it?
What does it really look like in real life?
In your day-to-day style?
Well, first of all, let me pile on one other statistic. So actually, I'll start off by telling you an interesting data point. So Rose, you probably remember when we were at Intel at some point when Noah Rabinowitz had joined as our chief learning officer, we rolled out those Korn Ferry 4D surveys. And then,
Oh, I remember them well.
and then everyone got a talent card mapped to the competencies. Well, when I took the survey, one of the things they were measuring was drives engagement. And there was a threshold for what they wanted to see an Intel executive from a drives engagement standpoint. And when mine came out, it was all the way to the right. The bar was full. And Noah said to me, we were having a one-on-one, he says, you want to hear something interesting? I said, what? He said, you have one of the highest drive engagement scores for the entire totality of the Intel executive population. And I said, wow, that's awesome. Like, what does that mean?
Cool. But what does that mean?
What does that mean? And then he showed me some data and statistics. And these are some of the things I talked about at Samsung. So let me just drop some other statistics, Rose, kind of tying to what you said.
Sure.
So Korn Ferry says that leaders that drive high engagement, there's quantifiable data to show better outcomes, AKA results. And if you're in sales, revenue.
Yeah, right.
And so what they said is, hey, companies that, first of all, they did a survey that says the top executives will tie about 30% of their market cap attributed to high engagement culture. And then there was another statistic that said, if you have a high engagement culture, typically high engagement teams deliver 2 times the sales performance of ones that don't engage like that over a 5-year horizon. And then the same thing for earnings per share. So those are very interesting data points. So what does it mean to engage? Well, what servant leadership, I talked about this in the past, Rose. It was actually Rick Dwyer. I said this in another podcast. And he looked at me when I was a kid and he said, hey, I work for you. And I thought, what does that even mean?
So is this was someone who was your boss?
He was never my direct boss, but Rose knows him. He was sort of the original vice president of sales for all the embedded business, the world that Rose and I grew up.
Okay. And so he was quite senior to you at the time.
And yes, and he took a taken to me at a very young age and must have saw my potential or how I was showing up. And he said, hey, listen, I would come to him for help. And he said, hey, look, I work for you. What does that really mean? Well, it means that my job as a leader is to remove the obstacles to your success. And that sort of planted the seed. And then as I started to go through promotions to management, right? Because leadership and management are 2 different things, right? You can lead from your chair as an individual contributor. But I started to build up practices of, right, okay, what is really effective? And I always had Rick in the back of my head about, I work for you. You let that guide you. So then as you're laying out, you get a new job and you have a team, and you're trying to lay out a vision and a strategy, you also have to talk about the culture, about here's how we're going to operate, right? I'll use one of Rose's favorites. It's Rose's IP, big T, little me. Or it's not your IP. He took it from, I think, a Penn State football player.
It was our high school football team T-shirts my senior year, yeah.
But the idea of how your language, right? Even how we speak, not me and my and I, it's we and us and our. And it's orienting the team on team. It's letting the team know, and constant communication, like anything in life. When we talk to our kids or we talk about influencing, we talk about anything in life, you have to repeat yourself over and over and over and over. And you have to reinforce over and over. But most importantly, you have to embody that. You have to role model. Because if you don't, you're going to get called on it. And when your actions and words don't meet, then that's how you lose brand credibility as a leader.
Right.
So, for me, it's a lot of things, but it really starts with the mindset of I'm here to serve the team. By the way, I also think I'm here to replace myself with someone. That is my job. I'm not here to hold on to a job for 5-10 years and become the quintessential blocker. I'm here to motivate, lead, inspire, and engage the team to not only drive the results we want to drive, but also to get the next leader ready when it's time for me to move on and go grow in a new capacity.
Outside of like the language that you used, were there any BKMs or repeatable behaviors that you would suggest?
Best known method.
Yeah, he knows that.
Yeah. To our listeners.
By the way, we ban Intel acronyms at Cornelis.
Yeah.
By the way, we tell them let's
I'm
stop.
sure Lisa doesn't drop them easily either.
She doesn't.
Yeah.
I think it's really just the behavior and checking yourself every day. Every time you open your mouth. Actually, it was another great mentor of mine. I can't help but not mention CJ Bruno.
Yeah.
And he used to always say, everything that comes out of your mouth is going to be like gospel. So what you say, how you say it, the tone in which you convey it, all of that matters. So I've even had to check myself where if I get into a high stress environment, right? So here I'm projecting positivity. I'm projecting, the team, this is how we're going to operate. This is what we're going to do. I'm going to serve all of you. I ask in turn, you serve and we're going to serve each other. But then there's times where the big stress comes and things start going sideways. And then my stress builds up. And then all of a sudden I may show up and I'm not showing up the way that I intend to show up.
I would always remember how sensitive my team was to my tone of voice.
That's right.
And so, when you get stressed, for me anyway, suddenly my voice might have an edge, and it's not meant to be directed at anyone in particular. It's just, I'm stressed now. But they were viewing it as like,
That's right.
very personal. And let me ask, I see people struggle with what you're saying a little bit, or sometimes a lot, because when they hear remove obstacles, what they can end up doing is saying, well, I'll just handle that for you, or I'll do some of it so you won't be as busy, or what have you. And so one, it can create a little bit of codependency, like, oh, I'm feeling overwhelmed, so I'm going to go to my boss and they'll make it easier for me. Or it can lead to the leader having way worse work-life balance than anyone else on the team because they keep sort of trying to protect their team and just do stuff for them so they're sheltered or whatever. So how do you navigate that? Like, how do you walk that line?
I think it's important about setting the tone and expectations on what the individuals are delivering, especially as you move up the management leadership stack to larger organizations. Effective delegation becomes super critical and important. I think you have to clearly define what that servantness is. And because when you're setting up an environment where the team feels safe, and I want to touch on psychological safety since you guys have been talking so much about it, you get a lot of that. You get people, when you're engaged with them, they have this innate desire to want to help you succeed. And so you just have to be really clear about where, like, hey, listen, it's about kind of setting those boundaries. Like, hey, I'm not going to say right clearly, I'm going to do all of this and the rest of you are going to do that. There has to be some dynamicism to it, and you have to talk about it because I'll give you a perfect example. One of the biggest things that was a holy cow moment for me going from Intel to Samsung was the level of detail that is expected from Samsung culture, especially when you're talking to the Korean executives. So at Intel, you can lead an organization. You have all these smart people around you. You might build some operational update that you have to deliver to Pat Gelsinger or whoever the CEO is or your business unit partner. But at Samsung, I had to present to the CEO of the subsidiary, and he would ask extraordinarily detailed questions. Like, hey, Brad, tell me how many open business opportunities you have in your pipeline for Q1 for the finance vertical. And I had to say something like 375. So there was a level of detail in studying, and that was a huge shift for me because the team, again, they're trying to help me get prepared. Like, hey, we'll give you all the data and we can do all the work. And it's like, but you can't, because the expectation of me is to be very deep in detail. So again, it's like anything else in any team, communication, all about in boundaries, but you have to be nimble and dynamic. It's not a static, I serve you. It's just about ebbing and flowing through whatever needs to get done, and always thinking about the balance of not only the employees, but also yourself as the senior leader so that no one's taking too big of a burden.
Before we move on, the one thing that I want to highlight that you hit, Brad, was the flexibility and the different expectations within different organizations, different companies, different cultures, different countries, and having the ability to be flexible in your servant leadership approach in that changing environment. So I think that's a really, really key message.
Different country cultures, different company cultures, so on.
And I just want to hit one real quick thing. I know we have other things to talk about, but like the psychological safety is really important because part of the idea of servant leadership in my mindset is to get the team to feel like you're going to engage and you're going to truly try your best to serve them so that collectively we can be successful as a team. But psychological safety becomes important because you need to create the environment where they're willing to give you the feedback in real time. Because I always believe this is how I'm showing up. I got intention. I got this. I'm experienced. I've done this 100 times. And then if you slip up, or if maybe you did something, you need the team to feel comfortable to come to you and say, Brad, you really shouldn't do that, or you really should stop doing that, or I'd like to see you do that, pivot to some other approach. So I have this 3 thing, right? Start, stop, keep doing. So a lot of times with my staff, I'd sit them down and say, okay, you need to tell me, start, stop, and keep doing. And when you get that, that's where the magic happens, because they feel safe to tell you because you've given them permission and you've shown them by role modeling your own behavior that you're open to learn and grow, and that you're not doing a tops down approach based on title or hierarchy, that you genuinely want to give them the space. And that just builds stronger bonds. It gives them confidence on their own leadership, and it checks you to ensure that every day you're showing up as your best self.
Well, and the feedback that leads to change reinforces a really high say-do ratio. And when your team sees a high say-do ratio, it reinforces the basis of trust for the whole organization.
Let's remind folks that say-do is if you say it, like as the leader, yeah, I'm going to check into that, or yeah, I will look at pivoting that. You actually have to do it. The say-do ratio needs to be equal.
Yeah. And that's an important, because what you just hit on, that's a life skill. How do human beings decide who they're going to be friends with or who they're right? Is this person competent to do what they say they're going to do? If they make a promise to me, if they say they're going to do something and they don't do it, right, then we know, oh, that's not the kind of people that I want to surround myself with. And it is so important. As a matter of fact, I'll bring this one out, Rose. I'll never forget the first, I had a performance review, and it might have been with Greg Bauer or it might have been with CJ at my time at Intel after I'd taken the Cisco role and the role calling on Cisco. And on the top of my focal, it said DWYSYWD. And it was the top bullet. I said, what does that mean? That's a long acronym. And they said, do what you say you will do. And I go, okay, so why is that on here? And they go, you have done everything you said you will do.
Oh,
and
so they're listing it as a strength.
That is absolutely critical, if not the most critical component of being a good leader, is you have to make and meet your commitments to your people, to the team, to the customer, to the company, whatever. That is table stakes.
Amen,
Yeah,
brother.
exactly. Amen. And again, you've sort of already touched on the fact that this has to be, if you want to be a servant leader, it's got to be authentic, right? I mean, the true intent, the true intention has to be there, and it's about showing up every day with it. I mean, there can be moments when the servant leadership approach is not, the appropriate approach. I mean, in a crisis, it might need to be some sort of top-down directive sort of environment, and then, potentially certain kinds of cultures. So what's your take on that? Like, what's your perspective on that?
Look, I don't like the term stick because it has a pejorative sense, but we all talk about this world of the carrot and the stick. And so, one of the challenges is when you run into, well, first of all, there's a basic thing of like, when I think servant leadership, if I'm just going to quantify it, I'd say, hey team, 90% carrot, 10% stick. And the stick is there, and the stick will come out when necessary in a crisis stake situation. But that's why I think the 90% carrot is so important, because you're driving love. I try to go, hey, I'm leading with love. And what do you do when you get a family that is close to you and trusts you? The people you can kind of bop over the head, using a euphemism.
Little bunny foo-foo?
Yeah, the ones you love the most, right? So it's important to establish that love. One of the things I learned, and again, I had a wonderful experience at Samsung, so I will never say anything. I mean, wonderful, wonderful experience, and what a great, iconic company. But when you're dealing with some of the cultural differences with an Asian company, right? Now that, and this is whether it's Japan or it's China or it's Korea, right? There's a history of Confucianistic principles that are dialed into the society, that everything has an order and a place and a hierarchy. And so, so what I would find is like at Samsung as an example, it's all about results. It's all about driving results. Results are the bottom line. And sometimes you have different approaches, right? So I've seen some companies and some leaders choose to inverse that proportion, the carrot and the stick. I just don't think it's personally effective. So I think it's just, and I communicate this. Like Rose knows I'm a communicator. And I believe the communication sometimes is the best way to handle this. So I just come right out of the gate and I tell our teams, like, hey, we're going to lead with love. This is how we're going to be culturally, right? And it's going to be mostly carrot and motivate, inspire, and engage. That's my job. But every once in a while, there'll be a stick.
What's an example of a stick?
For instance, at any team at any point in my career, so no particular place, the team is doing a great job, but we maybe set an ambitious target for revenue, right? I'm a sales guy. So I think at sales is easy to measure performance because it's very quantifiable. You hit your target or you don't.
Or you
Right,
don't.
exactly.
That's right.
Now, whether the target was set appropriately, that's a different conversation.
We've got a lifetime in those arguments.
Podcast episode.
No, Brad and I have a lifetime in those discussions.
But that's actually a good part. That's a very important thing to state for my answer, because when you get delivered a target, even if the target feels unattainable or unachievable, right? You have to get the team in the space of we have to hit the target, which means everybody needs to be all hands on deck and creative processes need to flow and new ideas. Think outside the box. Don't sit there and go, we got handed a crappy target and we're never going to hit this. Like, you got to get them out of there. So that's where the stick comes out. You got to really start saying, hey, we've got to do this. We got to do this. We got to do this. And I need you guys to make it happen. So that's where at the same time, hey guys, if this was a BS target, we're going to do everything in our power to hit it. But I can assure you, I will serve you for the next conversation about how we're going to set the target for next year. And if they feel that you're fighting that battle for them on that front,
exactly,
they're good, but you cannot give up. At Samsung, they used to say, the CEO I was referencing would always say, you got to shoot for the stars. And you're always shooting for the stars, and maybe you land on the moon, but you're always shooting for the stars.
Right. So it's sort of the way I hear you say stick. It's not so much a punishment or a humiliation or anything like that. It's more about ratcheting up the tension sometimes. And
correct.
Being like, okay, folks, no excuses. How are we going to get this done? Like that kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's really important. Like if you do apply it to my new role at Cornelis, right? This is a new experience for me, as I said earlier. And, here's my good friend, Lisa Spellman, who is the CEO, and we've known each other for a long time, a lot of trust with each other, a lot of working with each other. But, it's getting a startup off the ground is a tremendous pressure point. And that really starts with giving confidence to the investors and things like that about how we're going to drive revenue. And so, and sometimes you run into road bumps, right? You run into challenges and you have a roadmap and products and things like that. And it's not always smooth sailing. And then when that happens, it's very easy for the team to get sort of just disillusioned or hey, and you got to no, but we can't give up, right? We got to keep pushing. We got to keep trying. We got to come up with new ideas. And I think in this environment, there's going to be even more of that, which is why it's so exciting for me, because it's kind of like you're running 100 miles an hour. And again, you don't have a big machine behind you. So everyone's rolling up their sleeves, right? Including me.
And no dull moments.
No dull moments. Is there anything that you've changed in your approach to servant leadership, moving to a smaller startup culture, or has everything just applied?
I haven't changed anything, but I'm still a few weeks into the journey. I'm sure it will evolve. I mean, coming out of the gate, I definitely let the team know I have these 6 pillars of culture that are super important, and, made sure that it was instilled in them. And by the way, if you want to understand what those 6 pillars are, it's ensures accountability and drives results. It's communicates effectively, instills trust, cultivates innovation, plans and aligns, and employs a strategic mindset. And, and then they get deeper into those descriptions.
By the way, I'm going to pause you right there, Brad. For the people that aspire to be great leaders, if you can't rattle your leadership framework off like Brad just did, you don't have one. Keep going.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's very kind of you, Rose. And
all right, wait, I'll pause you again, just because, Rose, what he just listed, if we go way back to our first episode of season 1, we talked about leadership and management.
Yep.
And how you really need both mindsets. The mix might change depending on your role or level. And so I love what you just listed because, for instance, you mentioned plan and align. Leadership, you actually still need to think about what's the plan and so on. So yeah, I loved hearing those, Brad.
No, thank you. And I think, so that was the genesis of my arrival at Cornelis, sitting down with the team and saying, here's how we're going to operate. Here's the culture. And by the way, the culture weighting, that's the other thing I used to say, results are the what, culture's the how. And we used to talk about that with MJ, I think, Rose, on SM Rap, right?
That's Michelle Johnson Holdhouse, are one of our collective favorite people.
And I could make a case the how is more important than the what, because if you don't drive the how exquisitely, the what doesn't come. And you cannot decouple those two. You cannot decouple culture and results. So I think the biggest challenge, though, is here I have a team of a whopping 11 people right now, 12. So I just hired. So now you're back to like a first line manager type mentality, player and coach. I'm not sitting over a 400 person organization with lots of VPs reporting to you. So you realize that, okay, there's going to be a lot of playing on the field too.
Yeah, you're going to be carrying water jugs, brother.
That's right, which I don't mind because
I know you don't.
I used that. Well, I remember one time I did a town hall inside of Samsung, and I said, a lot of people think of leadership, since I've referenced in the Patriots. I said they think of your Bill Belichick on the sidelines calling the plays. I said, no, I think of it as I'm Tom Brady. You got to be on the field with your team, calling the plays, and the team, when they feel you're on the field with them.
Yeah, exactly. That you're in it with them
from the sidelines. It's amazing what a different, reaction
absolutely
you get. So I think that's going to be even more enforced or reinforced in this environment with Cornelis Networks. And I love that stuff. As a matter of fact, Rose, one of the things I missed, because as you go further up that leadership stack in the big companies, right?
We talked about that.
You're spending most of your time with bureaucracy or politics or managing up or, 8 hours worth of meetings. And here it's like, we just have to do, and we have to do fast and hard and dirty, sweaty jerseys. And if my jersey isn't as dirty and sweaty as everyone else's, even with my C-suite title, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, I got one for you, Brad. It's been clear your passion around your focus on servant leadership, and it's just so inspiring.
Yes.
But come on, everybody F's up once in a while. Dana and I have shared a lot of examples.
We shared a lot. I actually dedicated a whole podcast episode to one of my screw-ups.
Yeah.
But let's be vulnerable. Let's walk the talk. Tell us the time where you screwed up and what the story was behind it.
So by the way, before I get to the story, I just want to hit on one thing you said that's really important. Throughout all of this conversation, all this passion, all this discussion on servant leadership, you already mentioned authenticity, right? Because authenticity is key. It trumps all, because people are smart and they detect nonsense. And second is vulnerability. And that's where you get into some different approaches from different cultures and stuff. Some people think vulnerability is weakness. I think vulnerability is a strength. And I think the more vulnerable you are as a leader, and when you express your own vulnerabilities in front of the team, or when you admit that you screwed up and you apologize to them, it is very powerful. And so here was my big screw up, Rose, and it actually is kind of correlated to you. So I
Rose was the problem.
No, she has nothing to do with it. It was my issue, right? All me. But she's part of the story in an indirect sense. I was doing this job at Intel, being the account director for the Cisco account, and it was coming up on almost 5 years. It was a long time in the tooth, and the company, I think, was like, hey, what's his next growth thing? So I got approached to lead the IoT group sales organization. Rose was leading that for years. And then they asked her to step over and to do data center. And so they needed to hire a new leader. And so I went through the process and I got the job. I had to interview with the BU leader, a gentleman named Tom Lanch. Shout out to Tom Lanch.
Hey, Tom Lanch.
And then, of course, Michelle Johnson Holdhouse, who was leading the sales and marketing group at the time. I get the job. I'm super excited. I'm nervous. By the way, I was not a vice president yet. And I think Rose knows that is a huge deal at Intel, because it's a long, arduous journey to get there. I actually got there pretty quickly, which by the standards of Intel, which was very humbling. And I was like, holy cow. And was I ready for it? I don't know. I don't know what it means. So we have a face-to-face in San Francisco, and I get the whole team in the room, and I start doing my thing. Here's how we're going to show up, and we're going to be, this is how I'm going to operate. This is the expectation of the team. Everything I've laid out for you guys in this podcast. And I said, and by the way, team, everyone's going to come up here and present. And I want everybody to be present and engaged. I want lids down. I want cell phones off. I want everyone leaning in. And as I'm finishing my speech, our friend Justin Christensen, Rose, Intel had just launched the new promoted VPs for the company. And Justin Christensen must have seen it. And he goes, oh my gosh, Brad's a vice president. Congrats. And the whole room explodes, right? Because it's like, I get goosebumps talking about it because you're thinking, oh my gosh, I never in a million years coming in as a kid thinking I make it to this. And I'm not a status driven person, right? I'm simply
but it's still a big accomplishment.
It's a big accomplishment. And if you listen to my,
it's a really big deal with customers, by the way.
Yeah, it's a big deal with customers. But given my life story and the things I've been through in my life, there's a lot of imposter syndrome in there, a lot of not believing in myself. And I just couldn't believe, like, oh my gosh, that it happened. And I was so overwhelmed by that. So then I go to the back of the room, and then someone else gets up and starts presenting. And my phone is like, I mean, just imagine. I mean, it's hundreds of text messages. Like all this love is pouring in. And I look at my laptop and they're just the emails are flying in. And I got very overwhelmed. And for a couple of minutes, I was like, instead of just putting my phone down, shutting my lid down, saying I can deal with this later, I was so overwhelmed. I started like, thanks. Yeah, I got it. Okay. Someone saw it. They didn't call me directly on it. They actually called our friend Gina Katz, Rose.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to name this person, Rose, but you know this person. And they're a wonderful, wonderful person. One of my favorite human beings on the planet. But it got called out on me. And Gina called me and she said, hey, Brad, like, what are you doing? First time with the team, right? You set the tone.
Fully present.
Yeah. And then you didn't do what you said you were going to do. You actually were a hypocrite in that moment, or at least perception-wise. And unfortunately, that's not a great way to get started with your team. So
I never heard that story. That's pretty funny.
Yeah. It is. It is. But
and to your defense, it is really hard because your phone is like
pretty big deal. That's a pretty tough. It would be tough to ignore those messages.
Correct.
But your timing was bad. That's all. You got some bad timing.
But the good news is I'm glad it happened because that's what you need to grow. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to fail. The question is, do you learn from the failing? And so I had to go back to the team and address it head on, because that's how you turn it around. You say, look, team, I screwed up. That was not, I sit here and I'm coming off down the Mount Sinai with the tablets like Moses, and I'm reading the gospel. And this is what we're going to do. Here's the 10 commandments, right? And then I break one of them right out of the gate. And that's not a good look. And by the way, it's not who I am. So let me make it up to you. And then you have to make it up to him. And then you have to prove it. And then it took time, right? So you lose a little trust out of the gate, which is not fun, but you build it back up. But then when it was all said and done, I mean, the IoT sales squad, I mean, by the way, here's my Intel Quality Award, the highest, award you can get at Intel for IoTG. So we made some magic happen, but that was a huge learning lesson. And it still can happen. I also tell people, like, I'm not perfect. It will happen at times, but you got to learn the lesson.
And I appreciate that. I do see this dynamic, and it can be easy to understand where the most senior folks in the organization just don't think all the rules apply to them. And they could be little rules like that, like don't, be present and don't check your phone. And they're sort of like, absolutely for all of you. What I mean? And so it's nice, nice to hear a story where someone at the top level understands the rules applies to them too.
Absolutely.
Well, Brad, what we tend to do at the end of our recording is we do hot takes. A couple things that Dana and I take away that are like little nuggets, great learnings that we want to just reiterate with the audience. So do you want to go first, Dana, or you want me to go first?
No, I can go first. And what I think I have so enjoyed about this discussion is just hearing from a successful leader who, leads so strong with, hey team, this is my leadership style. This is how I operate. This is the culture I envision. This is how I think we should show up. Like, just really someone who is so willing to lead with that. Having now worked across many different industries, I don't necessarily see that all that often. So it's been really nice, Brad, just refreshing to chat with you and hear your perspectives.
Thank you.
And then I would summarize by saying, I really loved the linkage that you created, Brad, between servant leadership, psychological safety, and the criticality of the say-do ratio.
Yes.
If you screw that up, you break down both immediately. And your last example on how you recovered was really, really good. And then we rarely pile on to each other's hot takes, Brad, but you can tell the passion, commitment, and how serious you take culture and leadership when it comes to your responsibility to an organization. And it is unique. And having worked around and with Brad for years, it's not bullshit. So his say-do ratio on this is really, really high. And we have just been incredibly blessed to have you for the last 45 minutes hear your examples, your learnings, your successes, and a nice little failure in there that we like to throw in, a learning. We'll call it a little learning. So thank you, Brad, for the time.
Thank you so much.
And hopefully I'll get to see you soon, brother. It's been a while.
Yeah, I need to just make a trip down.
We chatted a couple weeks ago I was hiking and I called Brad and I'm like, where the hell have you been? And we talked for he's like, oh, I got so much to tell you. And we talked for an hour and a half. I literally hiked 5 miles while we were hiking.
I think we talked an hour one day and then an hour and a half the next day while we were hiking around.
We are blessed to have had you. I'm sorry it took so long to get you on the pod, but it's been our honor, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's been an honor, and thank you for the opportunity to share my perspectives and learnings and journey, and happy to come on here again in the future.
And with that, we have had Maestro Mindset. Thank you, everyone.